So you have to be very careful when you do any sort of, significant recording where you're invoking demons and dark lords, because all of my technical glitches and difficulties, the technical ecstasy of the show this far has been fantastic, and I love it. So we've gone from racism and lobsters at the beach to clandestine meetings at Denny's, all the way back around to the forehead sheen of a co-host, and none of it has made it on the record yet. And so just be careful when you mess with the devil, kids, because this is what happens.
It's true. It's true. It's hard to believe that we are only just now starting the episode, and yet we've already had conversations related to dolphins and Heaven's Gate and waffles and all that.
We're 25 minutes in, and you all will never hear a lick of it. So
pure gold.
Count yourselves lucky. But
or
in fact,
sign up for my OnlyFans, and I'll reenact the entire thing for you.
Ooh, yipes. Once you take your pants off, proof that the seaweed is always greener in somebody else's lake.
That's actually the crabs I was referring to post.
Oh, your pubic hair. Okay, got it.
Ooh,
all right.
That was a big mistake.
You think about going down there, but that is a big mistake.
Abandon all hope, ye who enter here.
Jamaican accent out of the way, I will say, by the eternal.
Behold.
It's the Disinformed podcast. I'm Shane.
And I'm Michael.
And I'm Michael.
Oh, we got a brand new beat coming your way every single week now. Look at us, we dedicated new stuff for y'all to listen to. Yeah, I'm going to do this the whole episode. I've decided. Sebastian the Crab will host the Disinformed podcast.
Excellent.
Oh dear, I need to get a shot.
I'll give you one.
A gun?
Open up, buddy.
Well, I'm thinking to get rid of the crabs here.
Lead salad.
Lead sandwich.
Lead Salad, my absolute favorite of all the Ozzy Osbourne solo albums. And important to note, the Dark Lord himself, as we're getting back into this week's exploits. Have any of you had any interesting discussions over the last couple weeks here? I know neither of you interact with any of our folks that usually give feedback, so I'm kind of speaking in an echo chamber, of course.
I mean, I talked to myself for about an hour earlier today, but I don't think it had anything to do with this conversation, so...
Was it in a secret meeting somewhere?
I would interact if I saw notes, but I'd have to go in and pop into every single Disinformed video to see if anybody's commented, because I would have no way of knowing if somebody's commented. So,
I guess that's fair. You can't access the YouTube because you're not a real host.
That's right. No, it's 100% accurate. So that's my excuse. So that's why I'm not interacting. What the hell's wrong with all y'all?
I'm interacting.
Yeah. He's the best person for engagement. He actually responds and is thoughtful. And actually, usually cares what people have to say.
I'm just going to patently disagree with everything he just said.
Well,
I mean, this is the Disinformed podcast, so...
Well, there you go. I'd hop in if I saw it, and if you tagged me in it, or let me know what video to go to. Okay. No, I don't mean get in on the thing. I just mean let me know that somebody's commented on a video. I'll hop in on my own account.
Okay. Well, I mean, you were springing to our defense when people were impugning the length of time it took for us to talk about the new D&D rules, and then we were harangued by some mouth-breathing sort of basement-dwelling automaton that decided to creep up out of their crud for a moment, get out from under their mother's teat, and chastise us for not being quick as a whip when discussing new rules of Dungeons and Dragons. I just caused 80% of our listenership to drop off the call here, so
they had to go back to their mother's teat.
Indeed. Hey, nothing wrong with little mother's milk.
Mm-hmm. And how?
Everybody loves some breast milk ice cream on this call, and I'll speak for all of us.
And we're actually sponsored by breast milk ice cream to you.
Literally have breast milk in my fridge right now.
Well, yes.
Not even a lie.
Not for you, though.
No,
unless you're going to steal from your daughter.
What kind of churn have you got going for that?
Oh, it's a slow churn. That's actually what he does in his off time. When he's not doing his 5 jobs, he just slowly churns that milk.
Slow churn's how we got the kid in the first place. But... Oh, mommy.
Oh, mommy.
Moving on. So, for those of you who are blissfully uninitiated with how this show typically works, and I count myself amongst your throng, what we usually do on the show is we like to delve into a random esoteric topic, and in the course of explaining it to you, the listener, and ourselves, we lie a little bit. And that is the shtick. It's delightful almost every time. But it is incumbent on the co-hosts to then try to ferret out the fact from fiction as they listen, call out the lies in situ, and see if we can make a good gamble at it. Otherwise, we have a denouement at the end of the show. We explain what was lied about and why. Hopefully, some hilarity ensues in the interim. But over the past several weeks, it has been nothing but doom, gloom, and diabolical acts as we have been discussing the devil himself, Satan, and
Hail
the panic
Satan.
in his name.
Hail Stan.
Or Stan, Satan.
Stan the man.
Either
I
way.
definitely stand Satan.
I got a starter
let him
cap with
stand on me.
AC/DC on it. Stan on you?
You can stand on me.
Stand
Okay.
by your
I'll
man.
stand for Stan.
All right, we've lost control of the bit again. Why am I not shocked? So, as
Jesus, take
we've...
the wheel.
No, we want nothing to do with the risen Lord this week. Unfortunately, we're going to get plenty of it, however. So,
Oh, no.
we have been talking about the Satanic Panic and its various permutations over the past several weeks, alluding to prior episodes Michael did as well, so we've got a full thing going on here. But this is finally going to resolve my discussion on the topic presently, at least for this iterative phase. But previously we have talked about the association of Satanism with serial killers, with spree killers, vampirism in the UK, of course, attempts at conjuring stories out of children by various folks working in childcare facilities, etc. Elder care jocularity, as Doc has asserted from time to time. And then we finished up with the role of metal music and censorship in the panic itself, all leading us to today's topic, which will be a discussion of the West Memphis 3, which is going to be very exciting. So, how familiar are both of you with the travails of the West Memphis 3?
I think that's my favorite combo at the Waffle House.
So is it like 2 slices of ham, 2 strips of bacon, and 2 eggs with
And
some
those covered hash browns.
Yeah, well, scattered, smothered, and covered, naturally.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. You and me, baby.
All right.
Ain't nothing but hash browns. So
Please. Let's
fry 'em on
not.
a skillet.
No more references to
swing and
bad
miss.
rap bands. I don't want to do it anymore.
Oh, God. I actually, aside from the little references that you do throughout this whole podcast, I don't know anything about the West Memphis 3.
Okay, well, fantastic. We'll get to have a little education then. I was asking purely because there's a level of detail that I can either include or exclude based on familiarity. So,
Oh, smother me with it, baby.
Just like those hash browns.
I'm regretting waking up today, just based on the last 30 minutes of my life. So, let's see if we survive. But all right, as we wade in here, I will tell you off the start here that I also missed the chance at a perfect bit, and that last week there were 6 lies. This week there are 6 lies.
Should have done 6
However,
the first time.
Yeah, I was a little overzealous on the first episode and threw 10, which was reduced to 8 based on the reduction. So we've missed the number of the beast, kids. I'm sorry. So it was 866. But we'll still try to get Jenny later on by adding a 5309 in there somewhere. But
Okay.
We'll make it work.
We recover, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes, naturally.
Still wouldn't get Jenny. Might get Stacy's mom, but
Not with that attitude.
Actually, just get
866
Sebastian.
would be He's under the sea right now.
Yes, not fielding your phone calls. The Dolphins, however, are always ready to meet you.
Hey!
Actually, like one of those bad 80s pickup lines that you used to get the late night infomercials on. Dolphins are waiting right now to field your call. Thirsty French dolphins will curl up inside of your blowhole at any hour of the day.
You can play with their flipper.
Single
Indeed.
dolphins in your area.
They're going to catch your love just like them getting caught in tuna nets.
Oh,
Dolphinlove.com.
oh no.
All right, moving on. So,
Sad.
Away from dolphin love. Oh, yeah, sad. The man who was putting babies in microwaves and jovially laughing about basting them previously is upset about dolphins and tuna nets.
That's because the dolphins are innocent, okay? They've done nothing wrong.
The babies know what they did.
Shithead little babies, that's right. They know what they did.
I was going to say, this is more about your parenting than it does about the children themselves, I think. But, all right, so... Free the West Memphis 3 was a well-known slogan echoing in the mouths and minds of many at the end of the 20th century, contesting the incarceration of 3 youths, and I do love using that word, Damian Eccles, Jesse Miss Kelly Jr., and Jason Baldwin. 3 individuals convicted of a triple homicide in 1993 in Arkansas.
Wait,
The state that
West
brought
Memphis?
you, it's West Memphis, Arkansas. It's about to get interesting.
No, it's not Memphis, Tennessee. They're not that cool.
No. Very close, though, in proximity.
It's just a little bit of west of Memphis.
But yes, the famed state that brought you Bill Clinton and, of course, their glorious current governor, who we're going to talk about here in a moment, Miss Sarah Huckabee Sanders.
Oh, God, no. Why?
Yeah. Well, because, current iterative phase of Satanism, I'm hoping to try to prove the devil still exists, and Sarah's the best evidence I have. So, in any event... I digress. These 3 teens were railroaded using hearsay, evidence that was admittedly circumstantial at best, admitted perjury, and, most famously, a police-prompted false confession.
Oh.
And thus, the West Memphis 3 were swept up in the hand-wringing satanic panic that infested America in the late 80s and early 90s, when both the general public and law enforcement saw devil worshippers in every shadow. I cribbed a little bit from last pod because I thought that was a perfect sort of accentuation to our prior discussions about how this panic had been whipped up into a rich, juicy fervor. And again, if you're looking for exhaustive retelling of this tale, the last pod sequence is the best to go with. They've got 3 episodes. They're exceedingly lengthy, and they get into nuance like no other. So it's a good way to start. I will try to give you the best blow-by-blow that I can, and I will try to avoid children crawling on stairs and some of the hyperbole and editorialization that was present in a lot of this. But most of the details or individuals who are documenting the details of this case come down very strictly on one side or the other. There's not a lot of people riding the middle line here, so there will be some very obvious sort of charged statements as I read through this. But
so we're not doing a both sides argument here.
I'm trying, but generally speaking, there is a pretty significant amount. I will also admit, off the top, there's an inherent, if I have to confess an implicit bias, it is there. I was raised in an agrarian community in eastern Arizona, which gives you an indication. I existed in a small town that had very much this same myopic mindset. And these individuals are contemporaries of mine as far as age. So it's not entirely shocking that I can sort of empathize with what happened here. But so I will admit off the bat that I do tend to come down a little hard on one side versus the other. But I'll let you hear the circumstances of the case and let you make your own decisions as we go. But the Last Pod series is exceptionally detailed and helps to illustrate the myopic and false association of goth culture with Satanism, psychopathy, sociopathy, and serial murder. Also shares my previous assertion that corruption or destruction of innocence essentially pushed a community out of the mindset of seeking justice and into the seething, bloodthirsty fervor of craving vengeance, which we have discussed in prior shows here on the podcast as well, if you want to delve into the archives there. Happens pretty frequently, and often the towns have little care or concern for the scapegoats that they attach this vengeance to. And so, we're going to discuss, for those who are completely unaware and want to brace yourselves, this is going to get, I will be a little less graphic than I would usually be given the circumstances, because this does involve the murder of children. So unlike Michael, who just wades gleefully in with talk of people being, shivved with scissors, I will try to be a little more deft in how I handle this. But brace yourselves, because this isn't going to be pretty.
You're going to handle this with kid gloves?
Yipes. Babies on spikes, yes. I will also give you the up front here, because I did not last week, and there were a couple people who were not tickled by all of a sudden, after talking about metal music, of just, oh, by the way, so this guy stabbed somebody 37 times out in the woods, and then had, roving tours of like the Hollywood Hills to be like, yeah, here's where I stabbed that guy. So I'm going to try to be a little more illustrative up front here. But murder of children in a small town does put passions at an all-time high, as you would expect, and absolutely makes it difficult to separate subjective truth from emotional perception. And often folks are seeking closure by forsaking equanimity, and thus we get what transpired with this trial. So, brace for impact.
Killing babies in a small town. That's a John Cougar Mellencamp song, isn't it?
I think, yeah, Little Pink Houses, as I recall. But, all right. I'm about to kill some children myself here. As we discussed in prior episodes, understanding the circumstances surrounding individuals who perform violent acts is critical to divining the possible motives for said crimes. Individuals raised in affluent communities might commit acts of vandalism or hazing as a means to try to distance themselves from their privilege in the eyes of their contemporaries, while those raised in impoverished communities may resort to theft or assault simply trying to procure necessities for their loved ones. A crime doesn't occur in a vacuum, nor were the individuals committing them cultivated in a petri dish. Our experiences, family life, socioeconomic background, and communities dramatically impact our way of thinking, and this is exceedingly evident in the circumstances precipitating the trial and conviction of the West Memphis Three. Also plays into the glorious goulash of all of our prior discussions that you do have to kind of consider the source for a lot of these incidents, and not just run with the ghoulish fervor of, it must be Satan!
Are you telling me that cops would lie to me?
The funny thing is that the police have, almost the least amount of involvement as far as the problems and dilemmas surrounding this. The police do still have some issues with the conspiracy, but a lot of this falls into the hands of people who are loosely affiliated and then the townsfolk.
So then was it bullshit that they got a police coerced false confession?
No. That is mostly where the police start having their problems.
Just that little tidbit.
Well, but, police procedural, like, generally speaking, we'll get into this later, but the police do try to do this with almost every individual that they take into custody. They start to formulate their own narrative, and if you say something that goes outside of that narrative, they will course correct you, because they don't like having to, reconcile these things in the court. And so the system is kind of inherently flawed to force people to give them the sort of information they want to hear from you. So they're quick to cast off anything that sort of contravenes whatever they've got as their narrative. But I digress. We'll get there. So to propel ourselves forward from the bedrock that we laid with last week's show, I'll begin by stating that teenagers coming into consciousness in the late 90s and early aughts, and I know I'm speaking to like kind here, we were somewhat forced to cope with a society that was awash in fear and loathing. Particularly in the U.S., conservative values and liberal ideologies were already fully in the throes of a tug-of-war that is still crippling our society in the contemporary climate. And thus, intoxicated on a brew of mistrust and paranoia, struggling with the widespread and rapidly expanding technological connectivity of the country, some conservative Christian families on the outskirts of certain socioeconomic circles struggled to reconcile their quality of life with the United States on the rise economically, while also wrestling to exert control over the youthful exuberance of their angsty adolescent children, who were being indoctrinated with the X-Files' famous credo, question everything.
And I think the great philosopher Eminem once said, my morals went when the president had sex in the Oval Office.
Those exact words, too.
Mm-hmm. Yes, the great poet philosopher Eminem.
But I mean, it's apropos. I mean, we're talking about the same era there,
absolutely.
And the morals of the country went out the window there when. The
Well,
president.
and see, there is an argument about whether or not that is kind of the galvanic force. And as we're talking about folks from Arkansas around this time frame, we're going from 1993 here. But yes, you're not wrong. You make a very salient point. I feel like that was kind of a tipping point in a lot of the weird sort of seesaw that we're seeing right now in the political system. But thus, when myriad, because I said so, parents attempted to exert authority over the youth in their communities, the response to these restrictions led many teens to new outlets for their aggression. The internet's a wonderful place, and we have seen myriad permutations of this destruction. But one avenue in particular arrived in the form of metal, hard rock, so that Doc doesn't get angry at me again, and new metal artists that we discussed in last week's episode.
And Biscuit.
Bands such as Venom, Slayer, Judas Priest, Stryper, Slipknot, and Marilyn Manson penned missives brimming with anthems to a cloven-hoofed anti-hero, fueling the ongoing fight against authority figures and the conservative establishment.
Was there a band called Stripper, or not Strippers?
Striper. Yeah.
Striper?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was. They actually have an, well, it doesn't matter, but they have an album that looks remarkably like 72 Seasons album cover. They're just like inverted black and yellow.
Mm-hmm. Very waspish. In any event, also to dovetail, Black Sabbath, it's worth noting here, actually came under scrutiny more via their politically charged material. There's songs like War Pigs and Electric Funeral, which, if you're not familiar, they challenge the military-industrial complex through comparisons to mindless sabbatic cults. So War Pigs was originally titled Walpurgis for the Witches' Sabbath, and the record company said, no, you can't do that. So they changed it to War Pigs.
Is that true?
Yes, that's true.
Oh, interesting.
There's a recorded version of Walpurgis, which is a lot of fun. But the record company's like, no, you can't do that. And they said, oh, okay, well, then we wanted to make it more, war-oriented anyway. Just call it War Pigs. And they lightly amended the lyrics a little bit. But Electric Funeral is also big for sort of criticizing individuals. It talks about the American GIs in Vietnam being hooked on heroin. So there's a lot of politically charged material coming out of Black Sabbath. And then, strangely enough, they're being labeled as Satanist and criticized. So not entirely shocking.
I wonder why.
That gets them in trouble more than their actual ties to the occult. But we digress. And not surprisingly, Paradise Lost, an admittedly biased and hyperbolic series of documentaries discussing the details of the case of the West Memphis Three, is anchored by the music of Metallica, a band loved by Damien Eccles and Baldwin in particular, as well as a pair of hosts of this show.
Is this a lie?
Nope, that is true. I told you actually in the preamble to this that Metallica was going to play a pretty heavy role in the discussion of this series.
Interesting.
So yes, Metallica is used in the soundtrack. It's one of the few times that Metallica actually allowed their music to be utilized.
Now that's bullshit. I don't think they ever allowed any music to be utilized.
They definitely did in this instance.
They copyright striked everything.
Yeah.
This was pre-Napster.
Yes.
Oh, okay, that's fair.
Technically, right on the verge of Napster here. Now, it's easy to say that not everyone responded rationally or cerebrally to the messages and themes that these albums projected. The genre of metal music itself was constantly under fire throughout these decades, beginning with the PMRC hearings that we discussed recently, and pushing through protests of performers such as Marilyn Manson following the Columbine mass shooting incident. This ongoing controversy played itself out as well in horror films such as Trick or Treat in 1986 and Hack-a-Lantern from 1988. I wish it was a lie, but it's not.
Okay, I've seen Trick or Treat. I've never seen Hack-a-Lantern.
What is that? Just a slasher film with someone wearing a pumpkin head or something like that?
It's a horror film which links Satanism and heavy metal together as an unholy union practiced by testosterone-crazy adolescents.
I need to find this movie now.
But there's nothing with pumpkins?
Well, I mean, I'm sure there's a pumpkin on the cover, but it's a very loose affiliation.
Disappoint. They could have workshopped the name better.
That's terrible.
The name is perfect.
No, the name is perfect.
Yeah.
No.
The plot probably needs a little more
Exactly.
investigation.
Okay, fine. They choose the name and then they work down from there, not the other way around. Because, yeah, you're right. It is a good name, but, like, if I was like, oh boy, howdy, I'm so excited to go see Hack-a-Pumpkin or Hack-a-Ween or
Hack-a-Lantern.
Hack-a-Lantern. Sorry, I'm already dead. Hack-a-Lantern, I would be expecting a slasher where someone has a pumpkin for a head or something to that effect.
I don't think anyone that's going, oh boy, howdy, is probably going to be in line to see Hack-a-Lantern.
I agree. It sounds to me, Michael, much like folks in Middle America, you're just looking for something to be outraged by at this point.
Oh, I'm outraged, all right. That name could have been tied to a better movie.
Okay, well, for the After Dark, we'll look up Hack-a-Lantern and see if we can find the trailer to watch it. And, we'll see whether or not a pumpkin-headed idiot shows up to attack people. Okay. Otherwise, just watch Return to Oz if you're looking for something that's that disturbing, visually speaking. Yeah,
fair enough,
you haven't seen it, have you?
No.
Guess not. All right, moving on. So, the melting pot of hysteria, and I don't mean the Def Leppard album, reached a boiling point in West Memphis, Arkansas on the 6th of May, 1993. Here's where we're going to start getting greasy, friends, so please brace for impact. We'll call this a gold star moment for those of you who are squeamish and appreciate Last Pod, so get braced. The bodies of 3 8-year-old children, Michael Moore, Steve Branch, and Christopher Byers, were discovered in a wooded area known as the Robin Hood Hills. And yes, their names are all very interesting, including, yes, Michael Moore is a real name of one of the individuals. It's quite peculiar. And Christopher Byers, yes, it has no relation to Stranger Things, though they may have lifted the name. Who knows?
They might have, that's
I wasn't
going
to call a lie on the names, even if I thought it, because I'm like, I don't think Shane would use that opportunity to inject a lie.
Yeah, I mean, also, I've done worse, but no, I just wanted to get ahead of that, because yes, as I read through those, I realized, looking at your faces, that does sound like those are lies. Not the case, unfortunately. Okay. Though, if it makes you imagine that this is what happened to Michael Moore to turn him into the weird, sort of like sweaty neckbeard that he is in film. And Bowling for Columbine takes on an entirely separate directive if he's a grown man being assaulted in Arkansas. But anyway, we digress. All right. Tonally, this is difficult to reconcile outside of laughing, and I know.
I tried. I'm sorry.
It's good. It's not a bad thing. We're not making fun of the victims, as they do like to say in Last Pod. We're having fun, or trying to. Laughing against the darkness. The children were found naked and savagely beaten, with their arms and legs hog-tied by shoelaces. Byers' genitalia had been mutilated, and law enforcement assumed that the children had been sexually assaulted. They actually presumed that his genitals had been bitten off, which is, as ghastly as you can get here. So, that's as problematic as I'm going to get here. We'll move away from this, but you can just see that the gravity of the crime is pretty extreme. So the subsequent backlash is somewhat understandable. As we've talked about, sort of corruption of innocence is a big thing in this country. And so something like this happening to 8-year-olds is pretty stark. What primarily added fuel to the conjecture that a coven of some sort was involved was that the word Diablo, coupled with a slapdash pentagram, was discovered etched into the trunk of a tree 20 feet from the bog the children were submersed in. And they were submersed. They actually found them in mud. They were weighted down so that they would stay and not float up. So someone was walking through the bog and stumbled across the bodies.
And what they discovered later is the actual murderer was working on a video game that was soon to be released.
I was going to say, so they're like, it's hype up for the game, because the game, the game came out 3 years later.
It was an ad campaign that went terrible. I think, wasn't it 94?
I'm on it.
I'm right on to nope. It's in my script. Just give me a second.
All right. Shutting up.
It was an ad campaign, went terribly wrong.
I can tell that we are contemporaries here. So while most of us console kids from the 90s would attribute this to the popularity of the Dungeon Crawler series of games of the same name, in point of fact, this crime occurred 4 years prior to the original game's release.
It was 97.
It was January of 97 is when the original Diablo came out. So there's nothing that actually connects those two things, and this is just a complete random bit of occurrence here as opposed to anything else. Just this name was etched into a tree with a pentagram.
And
it is easy. Go ahead.
Even more coincidence, Diablo 4 is either been announced or will be released soon as of recording. So it's even more coincidental.
And
with
also
all of its in-game purchases and all that, still microtransactions.
I haven't played the game since the second one, so it's whatever.
I played Diablo 3 a lot. My uncle was
I.
obsessed with it, so I appreciated it. It's a fun game. Also, funny to note, I wouldn't associate a lot of Spanish-speaking individuals in Arkansas either, and yet you have, Spanish word for devil etched into a tree here. So it's a little bizarre.
Well, sometimes they call, I think that name gets attached to, like, bacon-wrapped jalapeno poppers and stuff sometimes.
Yeah, something's a little bit spicy. They call it El Diablo.
Yeah,
all right.
So
I can see where you're coming at.
Also, if you like Taco Bell sauce, I suppose, just whip that into here. All right.
Ooh, even a worse marketing scheme gone horribly wrong. Taco Bell, new sauce, El Diablo.
Tastes like chicken. Tastes like children found in a bog. Okay, God. If I wasn't going to hell before, all right. Sorry, Mom. Sorry, God.
Let's move on. I'll stop interrupting the child murder.
This is what we're here for. We're here trying to have fun. Remember?
Isolate that. Cut that. I'll stop interrupting the child murder.
Didn't mean to intrude. I'm sorry, guys. I'll go out.
When we get to Aleister Crowley later, you're going to really chuckle at that. But in any event. So this, coupled with the horrific nature of the crimes themselves, which belies our laughter, naturally, appeared to confirm every fear that the previous decade had managed to cultivate in the conservative brain trust. For a community at the heart of the Bible Belt, the triple homicide had all the trappings of a satanic ritual murder. Now, again, this is from something that was 20 feet away from where the bodies were found, but that's sufficient enough to cast that in there. Plus, the molestation's a little much. So, later on, a confession, allegedly coached from Jesse Miskelly by detectives, implicated 2 other teens, Damian Eccles and Jason Baldwin, seemingly providing the authorities with their culprits.
Snitches get stitches.
Yipes. The confession itself, however, is highly contested, and you're going to regret laughing at that mere moments from now. On one hand, Miss Kelly has an IQ slightly above 70, and there are accusations that a police department desperately looking for closure simply coerced him into talking. So we've seen this approach as standard police procedure in a slew of shows and documentaries, from Serial to Making a Murderer, where police attempted to construct a clear narrative of the sequence of events to remove doubt from their case when presented to a jury later on. And thus, detectives will either inject known facts and evidence into a witness or suspect's story as they're recounting it, or they'll eliminate conflicting facts to ensure that the authenticity is there in a narrative. So they will actually stop tapes, course correct the person, and then re-record or move forward.
Interesting.
So,
I didn't actually know that part.
This is something that is frequently seen in police interrogations because they want to make it seem like it's naturally occurred. It's against the law to coach individuals, and so they do their best to turn the camera off, stop the tape recorder, start it back over, and say, so what you meant to say was, and this is one of those times where people feel that they are compelling people or that they are forcing them to give a false confession by that. This is a whole lot of hullabaloo that surrounds similar instances, particularly when you have someone who is, for lack of a better term, a little...
Not all there.
It's neurodivergency these days, but it's somebody who has a limited function, mentally speaking.
They are not wholly aware of what is going on.
Correct. And has a very limited, if not basic, understanding of what's happening. So false promises. For instance, in the Making a Murderer documentary, they show that, like, the young man who I'm going to allude to later, his name is just left my mind at the moment, but they were essentially promising, like, oh, you'll get to go home once you tell us what happened, and, kind of lead him down the trail here. And he made a phone call to his mother, hoping he was still going to get to watch WrestleMania that weekend.
Oh.
Like, just, it's a very obvious subversion, and it's disturbing when you start getting into the facts there. So, moving on. Thus, this can also often be coupled with other tactics employed to obtain a false confession, like threatening the suspect or their loved ones, withholding food or drink, keeping them awake for extended periods during interrogation, not letting them use the restroom, etc., to force the confession. Many feel manipulating Miss Kelly's mental limitations to achieve their own ends, as with the interrogation of Brendan Dassey in the Teresa Hallbeck murder case, which you see in Making a Murderer, is tantamount to provoking a false confession. So I will note here, however, that there are also reports that Miskelly confessed on other occasions of his own volition. There are claims, actually, when they took him into custody, he was confessing. He's like, yeah, I did it. Whatever. I was running away, and we threw stuff at the kids, and like I only caught one, and then I took it back to them, and they did all the other stuff. I didn't do anything. So he was offering stories as this was going on.
And who's saying that he's doing that?
So this is Miss Kelly. Yes. So initially, the cops, as they were bringing him in, he's just spewing confessions, according to their claims.
Right. That's what I was going to say. Is like, consider the source. Like, oh, he didn't just do it here. We didn't coerce it. Right. He was also saying it, multiple other times. In fact, when we brought him in, he was just all over the place with it.
And also, how they get to Miss Kelly in the first place is even worse. It's totally insidious, but we'll get to that as we go later on.
Although you said that I would regret my snitches get stitches comment, and yet I still haven't found a good reason why he would rat out his friends.
They're not even friends. They're barely acquaintances, which is even more disgusting.
Well, then it's a little bit, less disgusting then, because he's not snitching on his friends. He's trying to cast aspersions elsewhere. Like, it wasn't me. It was that Shane guy.
God. All right.
I've never even met the guy. I don't
said
know
by
him.
somebody who's not an actual co-host. I can understand. All right. So before either side could make an opening statement, the three were most likely found guilty in the court of public opinion. Local news reports hinted at the possibility of satanic activity in the area, and of course implicated Damien Eccles in particular as having a quote-unquote pact with the devil. From what the later documentaries show us of their environment, it is easy to assume that Eccles, Baldwin, and Miss Kelly would have stuck out like sore thumbs in West Memphis. Most residents of the region offer views indicative of its conservative values and evangelical Christian ethics. It is a typical working-class community populated by what's often described as the salt of the earth. A place where churches are found on nearly every street corner and morality is expected and strongly upheld. Anything that doesn't conform to this standard naturally would have been looked down upon and ostracized by the general community at large. The one person who reflects this general outlook and who becomes a strong presence throughout the series of documentaries is John Mark Byers, who is the father of one of the children who was slain. He offers up a wealth of sort of hearsay and nonsense, and he himself kind of becomes a very interesting character over the course of the story. He's a devout evangelical, and he shamelessly plays up for the cameras and continually fires off religious rants and threats of violence against this trio of children.
Oh, cool.
Because, they hurt his son. So, in a perfect example of how rumor and innuendo about the case permeated the community, he speaks of wild homosexual orgies the three engaged in, and the preposterous idea that the remains of his son's genitals were found in Eccles' possession. That is not true. And not demonstrably true at all.
Yeah, because if it was, that would make it a lot less vague as to whether or not it actually occurred.
So It's a lot of people listening to sort of the rumor mill in the town, the water cooler talk, and then just running with it, as opposed to waiting for any factual evidence to be contributed in a court of law. So this thing kind of got ahead of itself before they even managed to get them into a courtroom, which is kind of what we're illustrating here. I'll avoid casting any further aspersions, but
I was actually going to give him a compliment because his improv is pretty on point. He not just he yes and a whole paragraph.
He yes and a disembodied dick. So
not just any disembodied dick.
Oh no.
All right, moving on. The arrest of the West Memphis Three must have come across to many that the depictions of Satanism in the media were true, after all. As Pam Hobbs, who's the mother of Steve Branch, as Doc loses his tiny mind here, says in an interview, "Look at them. They look like punks." Yep.
Damn
Strong words.
Youths.
Strong words.
It gets worse.
Punks.
So to give
they
context
feel lucky?
to the oh god, all right, about to have another disembodied dick here. To give context to the unfamiliar, West Memphis police allegedly always believed that the murders were connected to devil worship. driven by the private investigations into satanic activity in the area, and those are heavy air quotes, by retired commander and would-be super sleuth Jerry Driver, who was actually a former airline pilot who became a county juvenile officer in his 50s. Yes, so he was never actually... he was convinced that West Memphis, Arkansas was a hotbed of satanic activities. Consequently, Jerry had purportedly been hounding Eccles and his associates for years, trying to rid the area of cult menaces.
Is just to tap in, since we haven't taken any stabs, and I know there's 6 of them hanging out here. Is his name Jerry Driver?
His name's Jerry Driver.
Is the facts that you provided about him accurate?
Yes. He is not, I will say, he's not the retired commander. He was a retired airline pilot who became a county juvenile officer. There were 2 individuals that I was running back and forth. One of them is from the last pod, and the other one's from a document I was reading. And the stories I was remembering afterwards were all related to Jerry Driver, who's from the last pod. I inadvertently put in this other person who was a retired commander who also claimed to be an expert in satanic activity in the area. So there was a lot of this happening. So that was just a slip of mine with not editing that out of my 17 pages of bloody documentation that I've got here.
So not one of the 6.
Correct. Not one of the 6. That was an inadvertent lie.
A typo, necessarily, not a lie. Still disinformation.
Yes, but it's no less disturbing that this is just a retired airline pilot who just elected in his 50s to start trying to chastise the youths of the area.
Yeah, I don't feel like that career change was really genuine. I feel like he was just getting like, damn kids getting on my lawn.
And the worst aspect of this, his motivations are so beyond reproach here, obviously.
Yeah.
I say that ironically, but there's a tale they tell in the last pod where Damien actually left town. He was taken out of his parents' custody for a bit and sent to live with his aunt. And then he fell out over there and had to come back to West Memphis. And as he got off the bus in West Memphis, Jerry Driver was waiting for him.
Jeez, I mean, you did say that he hounded them.
Yes, so
for
just
years.
To give you evidence, he was somebody who was obviously very interested in pursuing this, and so he is the one who ultimately puts Damien up as the prospect for who needs to be looked at in this case, and then they start to move the narrative around his assertions. So really dangerous and very frustrating, but we'll get into his little grim lattice work that we've been laying out here since episode 1 about people who just jump to conclusions with very little evidence.
I wonder if he was actually forwarded as a suspect even before Kelly started blabbing about knowing.
No. So no. Well, so I should say yes. Damien was the suspect initially, and they get to Jesse Miss Kelly because they suspect Damien. So they created a whole situation where they got Jesse's. I'm forgetting if it's. I think it's his. It's someone Jesse babysits for. They send her in to infiltrate their group because they think that it's a satanic cult. So they send her in to go flirt with Damien and seduce him to, gain his trust and learn his secrets. It's fucked up. And she is the one who is that they solely rely on to link them to the crime, more or less. I'll get into it. We'll
reach around to get to the guy.
Because I was going to say one that Kelly babysat?
Yes. So this is how Miss Kelly gets involved, because he was the babysitter for this lady. And she's like, oh, well, he knows these boys. And so then that's where they go to Jesse and force him to start giving the confessions. It's bad.
I thought you were saying the girl that he was babysitting, not the mother of the girl. No. Yeah, okay, I was like, mother. They sent a child in to infiltrate. Okay. No. Now, right. Now we'll all right. Everything's good. All right, cool. I was just very confused. I was like, cops are.
So what happens when I start saying things just, off the cuff here as I recall them versus what's in the script? So
sorry, I'm just very excited for this story.
I understand. So, good old Jerry Driver, admittedly caught up in the fervor of the Satanic Panic, gleaned many of his concepts about cult activity by reading a book that we discussed previously.
Oh, no.
Maury Terry's 1988 work, The Ultimate Evil, which, of course, as we alluded to previously, pointed to a satanic Kabbalistic cult, the Process Church of the Final Judgment, or The Process, which Michael loved, because this is his favorite name ever, which was founded by Robert de Grimston, and its purported membership of serial killers and occultists, which included Charles Manson and the Son of Sam killer. Thus armed, Driver became convinced that Satan's emissaries were insidiously destroying the lives of decent God-fearing folks since the 1960s, as you'd expect, and to him making West Memphis an enclave of decency in the heartland of America a prime target for such debauchery. As part of his attempts to combat the Process's network, Driver started his own neighborhood watch group to combat satanic activity in the area, and he would drive around at night with his Ghostbuster sidekick, Steve Jones, on the navigating the country roads of the area during full moons, sincerely trying to catch satanic cults in the act of celebrating what Driver mistakenly thought was the witches' Sabbath.
See, this would be a funny sitcom to watch.
Uh-huh.
Where they just see, like, I don't know, some sort of, like, sheet drying in the wind and they think it's a ghost and they spend, like, 30, 40 minutes just, like, hunting all over the place, like, upsetting everyone, just intruding everywhere.
Uh-huh.
And it just turns out, oh, I guess it was just a sheet, laugh track, and cut to credits.
What's even funnier is also this is a couple of rednecks in like a 4-wheel drive truck with like a deer spotlight just romping over the hills going like, we gotta find them Satanists, Jesse.
Come on, let's go find some Satanists.
Jerry, come on. You can see the reflections of their eyes. They out there. Damned orgies. Their pallid flesh reflecting in the moonlight. Oh, we'll see them. I hear that they's all got reflective skin. I read it in that Twilight book. We'll find them. By God. Exactly. So, yes, it's as ridiculous as you would expect.
I'd watch that.
At the time, the more gullible members of the American law enforcement system were convinced that any murder which wasn't quickly or readily solved must have been the work of Satanists, who are in the habit of sacrificing innocent men, women, and children in the name of the devil. So much so that actually, in 1991, the FBI performed a study to determine how widespread this activity was in the United States, and the only substantive cases that they could fully attribute to satanic cult activity were trespassing and vandalism.
Did the FBI actually do this study?
They did actually do this study.
Did they find actually anything related to...
Mostly trespassing and vandalism.
Okay.
They could not substantively link... And every place they showed up, they're like, we think there's some satanic activity in the area. Like, oh, okay. Well, who are the actual suspects?
Satan.
Devil. Diablo. I seen that on the tree.
Sainted.
So, yeah, it just... ludicrous.
Driver, kids from
of course,
Sesame Street, because I hear them use the letter L before Diablo.
That Oscar, he hangs out in a garbage can. That's suspicious.
That's right. That Count, I hear he's a vampire.
That guy's got green hairs, just like Doc's pubes. I don't trust him. He must be under the sea.
And now listeners are wondering, why do you know the color of my pubes?
Well, you offered it earlier when we were discussing all of the crabs.
But now you have accepted.
Yes. I'm not shocked that you've got your punk rock below the waist. In any event.
Like a mohawk. It's Liberty Spikes. It's Liberty Spikes. Yes.
He's still wearing like a bondage bracelet around his balls.
I got a little leather jacket around.
Oh, rock till you drop. In any event, Jerry Driver, however, would not be dispirited by all of this FBI talk. No. And he refused to believe anything other than ultimate evil led to the deaths of the 3 young children in his community. And thus he immediately leapt to impromptu interview Damien Eccles, who was an 18-year-old high school dropout at the time and a self-proclaimed Wiccan who was widely considered a troublemaker about the case. when Driver performed a search with no warrant, mind you, they discussed this in the last pod. He just, in the area, you could actively saunter up to people's parents and just sort of sly your way in by saying, like, hey, listen, we're really worried about your son and we don't want anything bad to happen to him. And we just want to kind of intervene, get ahead of this. So if you just let us come in, have a look at his room, we'll see if there's anything we can do. And then, we want to just disprove these charges up front and help to clear his name. And of course, parents hearing this, not believing that their children are up to any sort of lurid activity at all, will be like, oh yeah, please come in, disprove, prove my son's innocence.
Will Smith was right. Sometimes parents just don't understand.
Oh God, thank you. So in any event, Driver, after doing the snake oil pitch about trying to prove Damien's innocence, gets access to Damien's room, where he discovered the typical accoutrement of a teenage goth misanthrope. Damien had admittedly a notebook with poetry in it that had pentagrams and upside-down crosses on the cover that he inscribed with the title, The Book of Shadows.
Oh, God.
Is
that's
that true?
Corny as fuck.
That's true, yes.
Oh, man. I already feel sorry for this kid. He probably was beat up in high school.
My best friend had a Book of Shadows when we were in high school, and we would hang out. We'd go to the anime club, and I would sometimes wear a trench coat. And then teachers were a little concerned about the trench coat mafia thing at the time. And so I can't really cast too much aspersion on this fellow.
I was the editor of my high school literary magazine, constantly walked around with a bit of a mopey attitude. So yeah, I can relate to some of this. Needless to say, I knew a lot of these kids. I was not one of the goth culture, but I was certainly accepted as one of the clan and spent enough time with them doing poetry readings and things of this nature that I knew these individuals. Like, most of them really decent, good-hearted folks that were just, trying to find a way to feel included in something. And when you're ostracized from the general social circles, like, it's very easy to just latch on to anything you can to be, oh, I'll just be incendiary. I'll wear black clothing and look weird, dye my hair different colors. And, you find your ilk that way. And it's whatever means gets you there.
It's very interesting because there's a lot of overlap in terms of that mentality with, like, the skaters. I found back in high school
and punk rockers, just all the disenfranchised folk, essentially, the nerds, freaks and geeks, if you would. Go ahead, Michael.
Good reference there.
Thank you.
I just want to put it on the record that I wasn't casting dispersions on him having a book where he was writing poetry. I was only casting dispersions.
Yes,
the title. Yes, it could have been a little bit more. Like if you're expressing yourself in a way, like you could have. Come up with a little bit more creative.
I'm not going to listen to your criticisms about names after you're casting, doubt on the quality of Hack-a-Lantern as a name.
If it doesn't have a Halloween or a jack-o'-lantern themed slasher killer,
I thought you said ejaculate.
If it doesn't have an ejaculate themed killer,
it's an ejaculantern.
It's its own sort of pumpkin spice.
That's a brand new porn film coming out this winter. Ejaculantern. All right, I'm sorry. Moving on. In any event,
back to the baby murders.
Michael, in your, to give context though, this is a 17-year-old high school dropout in Arkansas, which had the only state in the union that was last behind ours in education.
Fighting for last.
Yeah, they eventually did leapfrog us, however.
They
from
did.
50th to 49th, and Arizona fell in the back. So I'm not casting any aspersions here.
Don't
about
feel bad if
quality.
you ain't first, you're last. So you're in good company with everybody.
Oh no,
else.
we were actually last for probably still. So
yeah, not shocking. So along with the Book of Shadows, there was also a wide array of books by Stephen King, believe it or not, and a cluster of black T-shirts, all of which Driver saw as definitive proof of Damien's associations.
Call
with
it,
Satan.
Michael. I know you want to.
I'm going to call bullshit.
Nope.
Bullshit on the Stephen King. Okay,
No,
so now I
talked
can
about
still
this.
judge. I'm still judging now the title of his poetry book. Then.
God. Yeah, because Stephen King's poetry is much better. Agreed.
No, but he was very eloquent in his words.
Yes.
So
But he's a 17-year-old reading Stephen King, not Stephen King himself. So let's give a little, a little understanding. But yes, as I talked about, I think in the sort of preambles of getting into this, Stephen King and Metallica both play a very heavy role in defining the characteristics of Damien Echols as a person, which, again, not shocking that I feel a certain kinship with him. It's just, I didn't spend a lot of time, dressed in black and talking about Satanism until I got on this podcast. And now suddenly I'm feeling very seen. So it's a wonder I'm alive right now. That's what I'm driving at. In any event, to illustrate this point, Echols actually would later comment on how bizarre this correlation was during an interview he gave to The Hollywood Reporter following his eventual release. Spoilers, this happens. The Hollywood Reporter asks, "It seems ludicrous that they'd take the stuff you're into as a teenager, like the stuff kids explore, and use that as proof that you're a killer. Like that could happen to any kid in the United States." Echols responds, "I mean, you think of things that most people wouldn't think is a big deal, like the fact that I read Stephen King novels. That's the #1 highest-selling author in the history of the world." I don't think that's right, Damien, but he's sold a lot of books. But that's the #1 highest-selling author in the history of the world, and it's weird that I read him. Like, you don't see how that they can do something like that, but they did. In the last podcast episodes, they extensively detailed that Echols' appearance, wearing black clothing, listening to heavy metal, and having a fascination with the occult, was what led authorities, and of course Jerry Driver in particular, to question him, rather than any substantive evidentiary link to the crime. Driver had been more or less stalking Damien for the course of several years, and the legality of this harassment is still greatly debated by those who followed the genesis of the case. But to give you an example of the mindset we're dealing with here, Driver expertly described the telltale signs of practitioners of occult activity thusly. The tattoos, the devil rings, this, that, and the other.
He did not say this, that, and the other.
That's literally what escaped his fucking mouth. He said this, that, and the other.
Them tattoos, them rings, and this, that, and the other thing. Yes. Is Satan.
So that shows you just how far afield we get with, okay, that's the motivation, is like, that's how you spot a Satanist. Well, they got tattoos, and they wear rings, and, stuff.
Satan stuff.
Fuck. It boggles the mind, man. It really does. It's worth noting, hearkening back to prior episodes, that Echols had a documented history of mental illness, notably depression. He came from an extremely poor family in a community that was already on the fringes of being destitute, so receiving frequent visits from social workers, and concurrently, he just rarely attended school. Certainly never felt welcomed there, was kind of disenfranchised. And when you're ostracized, it's kind of difficult. You just, any port in a storm, start latching on to whatever friends you can, or you just isolate entirely.
Yeah.
Thus, he and his girlfriend ran off later and then broke into a trailer during a rainstorm. And this is where all of this stuff sort of generated initially. They were arrested because they were found by police, though the trailer was unoccupied. No one lived in the thing. It was just a derelict trailer standing there, but they broke and entered. They noticed that the trailer was a-rockin', and they came a-knockin'.
Oh. Someone probably noticed that, hey, there were lights
probably
or something
reported,
in this abandoned...
Stuff was flashing around, and they were just a couple of kids that were a little randy, looking to find a quiet place to have some fun. They were caught by police, and from that point forward, he was a criminal.
I thought you were making a joke that he was caught in situ.
No. Yeah, they were caught in the act, and thus there you go.
You got to do what you got to do.
Awkward.
So they were arrested, though Echols was ultimately only charged with burglary. He spent several months in a mental institution in Arkansas subsequently, after receiving full disability status from the Social Security Administration. So if that's not enough to give you an indication that there are some problems afoot here... During Echols' trial, Dr. George W. Woods testified for the defense that Echols suffered from serious mental illness characterized by grandiose and persecutory. There we go. Thank you. I went Michael for a moment.
No one goes full Michael.
Easy. Grandiose and persecutory delusions, auditory and visual hallucinations, disordered thought processes, substantial lack of insight, and chronic incapacitating mood swings.
Jeez.
This would, of course, help to illustrate the reasons by Eccles, who denied knowing the boys or having any involvement in their deaths, was admittedly somewhat flippant and incendiary with officials when he was being questioned about his connection to the case. He knew he had nothing to do with it, and so he was telling them, fuck off and go find somebody else to talk to who's, a better interest.
I mean, however, honestly, yeah, that's fair.
The authorities interpreted this as an indication he was simply smug about the tragedy and thus accountable for it.
Oh, wise guy, eh?
Exactly. So here's where the Officer Krupke slippery slope, I'll take you in for that Twitter comment, gets us into some trouble. And thus the police focused solely on Eccles and soon received help from Vicky Hutchison, whose 8-year-old child was friends with the victims and claimed to have witnessed the murder, but was unable to identify the assailants. So, in a meeting, this is where we start getting. Again, this is the information that was fraudulently provided to the police.
Well, you see, I witnessed it in that I saw it in my dream.
Mommy told me that I saw it, so I saw it.
Mommy said there were people running. Yes. In a meeting with police, she was told that Eccles had been interviewed, and she offered to quote-unquote play detective by meeting with him.
What? No.
Yes. So this is who they brought in. And as I said, I believe Jessie Miss Kelly actually helped to babysit her 8-year-old. So this is where some connective tissue started getting involved here. So the law enforcement of the area encouraged her to go do this. And so she then enlisted Miss Kelly, her 17-year-old neighbor who knew Damien and had a IQ of barely over 70, will remind everybody. They said he essentially functioned like a third grader. They affectionately referred to him as like a Forrest Gump character. So very innocent.
Affectionately referred to him.
All right.
Forrest Gump is an American
Forrest Gump's
hero,
a wonderful
okay?
person.
Yeah, no, I just don't think that they were affectionately using it.
Oh, okay.
Well, I'm referring to, I think on Last Pod, they also liken it to being like Forrest Gump. So, yes, I don't think they were being mean-spirited in saying it. But in any event, according to Hutchison, who, again, I remind you, is doing this of her own accord here, in May 19th, 1993, she, Miss Kelly, and Eccles attended a gathering of witches at a nearby field.
It's right next to the gathering of the Juggalos.
Oh God, that sounds terrible. Who are you? Who are you seeing? Are you here for the witches? Are you here for the Juggalos?
Oh, I'm a Hatchet Man all day, every day. Hatchet Man all day.
Oh God.
Wow. All right, my brain just vomited a little. I'm sorry.
They ran out of water, and so they were making witches cauldrons full of Faygo.
Oh, stop Faygo! No Faygo.
Toil. Boil in trouble.
Okay. The clown makeup is the same in both circles, though. Strangely enough.
Very true.
In any event, she claimed that the proceedings developed into an orgy, as you would expect, at which point she asked Damien to take her home. Miss Kelly stayed. Hutchison later related these events to police and reportedly passed a polygraph test. Now, later on, she recanted all of this and said what actually happened was that she got drunk and got so increasingly intoxicated in her front yard that she just blacked out and made up the rest of the story so that she would have something to offer to the police.
Which, I memean, if she does this on the regular and, just assumes things happen, you could believe it.
Yep.
But just you're literally playing with people's lives.
Exactly.
There.
And also, it's important to note that there was a monetary reward being offered for any information to help apprehend the killers.
So she was incentivized.
So you can add motivation here. But again, all of this is, I'm trying not to editorialize this too much because otherwise we'll be here for 4 hours. This is a very involved process, but unfortunately, I'm already involved here. So, armed with this information, the police then went and interviewed Miss Kelly, who reportedly had an IQ of 72. As they keep mentioning this, I'm sorry, but
I want to drive that point home. Damn it!
Despite initially denying involvement in the crime, he eventually confessed after sufficient questioning.
Wait, I thought he was confessing as he was coming in.
So here's
Allegedly.
the thing. They talked to him initially, and then they took him into custody. And then, armed with having all the information that was disclosed in the initial discussion, he started to confess about the crime, but was including details that they provided to him during the initial discussions. So technically, depending upon who you're asking, the police said, he was offering up a confession as we were taking him in. At this point, I think he's trying to talk his way out of being taken into custody because he's terrified of being taken into custody.
Yeah.
So it depends on who you're listening to and the story. So again, like, I'm trying not to editorialize this, saying definitely one way or the other. Just kind of depends on who you're talking to. Unfortunately, the source that I'm running from in a lot of this has a very obvious bend in their opinion. So as I'm pulling some of this, I'm realizing it's like, they've kind of tempered the expectation here. But in any event, eventually they were able to coerce a full confession out of him that was doctored with details that they chose to inject or remove. And they later then helped to detain the 3 boys and left before Eccles and 16-year-old Jason Baldwin, who were best friends, committed the murders. This is what he's saying. Okay. Sorry, I messed that sentence up terribly. Saying he was there, he was present when the crime committed, but he didn't take part in it. And then when they said, like, well, you were there, you were a part of it regardless, he said, well, all I did was help chase down one of the kids, and I grabbed him and brought him back to the other 2.
James, still not the worst Baldwin.
Easy. It's Jason, thank you. In any event, so all 3 were eventually arrested in June of 1993, though there was no physical evidence connecting them to the crime or the crime scene, and, coincidentally enough, each of the 3 had alibis for the evening of the crime.
Oh, jeez.
So, this shows just how far afield that you can get when the court of public opinion and police prejudice essentially pushes you over the edge. So, although the police investigation is not illustrated in great detail, Miss Kelly's confession is something that is debated, particularly in the documentaries. Paradise Lost takes the side of the defense that the police most likely coerced the young man through long hours of interrogation and manipulation and taking advantage of his low IQ. And then, interestingly enough, Miss Kelly was tried separately from Eccles and Baldwin, as though they wanted to isolate him further, and there is no denying that they attempted to kind of rush through his trial. Something often discussed is Miss Kelly allegedly confessing to his involvement multiple times in an array of escalating ways, with the police deepening his involvement to ensure that they could convict the other 2 boys by association. So he was giving them more details to try to get himself out of the situation, and to them that just deepened their resolve that the other 2 boys must have done worse because he keeps offering these other things up. So I'll leave that alone. There's a lot of paragraphs revolving around that, but in any event, it should be noted he was given a chance that Miss Kelly was given a chance to testify against Eccles and Baldwin in exchange for a lighter sentence after he was convicted, and he still declined to take involved. So once he figured out that he was being screwed, he's like, I'm not going to make this any worse. I'm not going to go and be a witness for the prosecution on this. So without use of Miss Kelly's confession or his testimony, the prosecution then proceeds with the trial of Eccles and Baldwin. The evidence
back that up. So without use of his conviction? Like, why couldn't they use the conviction?
They didn't use his confession.
Confession, sorry.
Yeah.
Why couldn't they use the confession for the other 2?
Because he declined to be a witness.
Oh,
so he would not go in and be on the record. So they can claim that these things were said, but he was not officially on the record.
Right, that makes sense, because then the defense would want to have him brought.
Yeah, because it has to be asserted in court. And if he's not willing to assert it in court, then it's technically not part of the record.
Gotcha, makes sense.
And at that point, it's hearsay on top of everything else, which is even worse. But in any event.
I'm just surprised that they didn't bother to go with that. In for a penny, in for a pound.
Yeah. So they proceed with the trial of Eccles and Baldwin despite all of this. So again, they've lost the person who sort of inculpated them in the first place. The evidence then gathered against the 2 was circumstantial at best, as you would expect, and the argument presented to provide a link between the murders and the occult is not convincing. The testimony from their occult expert, Dale Griffiths, is not very credible. Generally.
Wait, I'm going to pause and jump in real quick. Was the fact that they had alibis a lie?
No.
Interesting, because I figured, like, wouldn't that, like, stop it? Yeah, because I was like, wouldn't that stop it cold turkey? Like,
nope.
Not if they're out for blood.
Well, but and I physically couldn't have done it. I was here. I have.
But that means that the police believe your alibi and that the judge believes your alibi and are willing to accept this. If the community has already decided that these gentlemen are guilty, they're acting from a place of assuming their guilt as opposed to assuming their innocence. And a lot of the circumstances surrounding the trial do indicate that was what was happening. It's a popular term these days in certain presidential candidates, but it's a literal witch hunt. Because they thought they were part of a coven. So this is how this happens. So the testimony from their occult expert is Mr. Dale Griffiths here, and appears laughable that they'd allow him to give any sort of significant input on the matter in general. Although the defense attempts to discredit him as a witness by pointing out that his degrees all come from correspondence courses, the damage was still likely done. Griffiths was underqualified in both knowledge and experience, but because he was known for appearing on television programs as a witness regarding Satanism in early as 85, it's more likely the members of the jury recognized him and assumed that he was correct by association.
If he's on TV, he's got to be legit.
Yeah, exactly. He knows what he's doing. So that's not bullshit.
Not bullshit. No, he was on television. And then he just became famous for being an expert witness on satanic activity and the occult going forward. I did not include a lot of the material because I was cutting swaths. This article was very lengthy. Needless to say, this is years of activity. So I unfortunately didn't include any of the material, but it was essentially tantamount to the same nonsense that was being spouted of look for black t-shirts, black metal material, tattoos, and things like that. It was as spurious as that. Exactly. So they weren't offering anything substantial at all to connect them. I do have a couple things, however, as we go forward here that will kind of link, which are ludicrous. They cross-examine Eccles, and that's also as ineffective in dissuading any jury members from prejudices that were likely established prior to the trial. While his attempts at describing some of the concepts behind his Wiccan beliefs are noble in the intention of proving that he isn't a Satanist, the nuances between that and Satanism were likely lost on the jury, and they wouldn't necessarily have the ability to navigate between the two and to differentiate sufficiently. So
and for these folks, they're just like, as soon as they hear Wiccan, they're like, burn the witches, burn the witches.
Exactly.
No, they probably thought if he wasn't a Christian, he was a Satanist anyway, and that's all that matters.
And it's safe to assume that it would go that anything involving the occult in general has the stigma being attached to being satanic because it's not Christian. This is the 90s. So all right, so for all the prosecution's alleged expertise in establishing that the crimes were motivated by ritual, they make several notable blunders noticeable to anyone who's familiar with the writings of Aleister Crowley. It's important to note here that Damien was also a fan of Crowley, but that's a loose description, and I'll illustrate why. So this is how they approached it. As the cross-examination of Eccles continues, they inquire about his knowledge of Aleister Crowley. One point that's brought up is, during the conversation, is Crowley's alleged advection of child sacrifice. Now, this is included in some of the writings and referred to within Thelema. And although this is meant to establish Eccles' possible motivations for committing murder of children, there is a slight irony to anybody who's actually read the material. Crowley, who often wrote in code,
talking about masturbating or whatever,
used the term child sacrifice to refer to the act of ejaculating.
I see.
So they asked if he advocated child sacrifice, and it's like, well, yeah. But
it is technically sacrificing. Yeah.
And so from a perspective of a teenager, you have him laughing at the fact that in court they're bringing up the masturbation and he's chuckling to himself. But if you're looking from somebody who's already believed that he's evil and villainous and then doesn't explain any further, it's just like, oh, look at him. His bald-faced, like, endorsing child sacrifice, and he's laughing about it. And so not being inside on the joke, not knowing the differentiation, and also the prosecution didn't know enough to jump on this either. So you've just got ignorance on all sides, and this is the folly that kind of moves forward. Furthermore, Damien would later admit that the bulk of his familiarity with Crowley stemmed from his purported conjuration of the demon Choronzon, which is known as the Dweller of the Abyss in Thelema. And this is actually one of the things that Crowley is purportedly famed for having done. Is for those who are not initiated. Choronzon is according to certain documentation, is the snake that tempted Adam and Eve, essentially, and cast them out. He's purported to be the reason that angelic language is lost on the earth now, because once the angels kicked the two out of the Garden of Eden, they lost all recollection of angelic language, things like this. So there's a lot of mythological import.
He's the reason for the season.
Thank you. Needless to say, also, during the conjuration of Choronzon, he purportedly shapeshifted as an attempt to seduce Crowley and his assistant while they were involved in the conjuration. At one point, he actually morphed into Crowley himself because he routinely had sex with his subordinates.
Yep.
And also Crowley was in the submissive position at this point, so they were both naked. Crowley was supine, essentially. Just in the so you can imagine this whole thing's just ludicrous and a bit bizarre.
There was a lot of magic.
Yes.
Yeah.
And obviously I've spent too much time delving into some of this stuff, so it's superfluous to our discussion here, but I just find it interesting.
But hilarious all the same, yeah.
And also Damien's a big fan of Stephen King novels, so he's talking about transconfiguration in relation to Randall Flagg and The Stand, which is one of his favorite books. So there's connective tissues here in what Damien is interested in, but it has nothing to do with the case. And the prosecution sitting here, thinking like, there's nothing that they bring up related to demons or the fact that Choronzon is a demon or Crowley is known for demon conjuration. They don't touch on any of this to prove that he's a Satanist. They just talk about child sacrifice and him being a proponent of sex magic. So they're purely pointing to his subversion, and they miss all the demonology, all of these other subversions, all the other connections to King that Damien was fond of. So the nuance is all completely lost on this, and it's still sufficient for them to convict him.
I was going to say, they might not have missed it. They might have thought, we got it already in the bag.
Yeah.
And they didn't even bring up the best part that would have tied everything together with Stephen King. The end of it.
Uh-huh. Plenty of children there.
Unfortunate.
In any event. So, no mention of Crowley's demonologist exploits were discussed at the trial, and the defense focused purely on sex magic and child sacrifice in order to incriminate him. So, moving on, as the trial approached its resolution, both Eccles and Baldwin were shown as being completely confident that they'll be acquitted. The closing arguments given by the prosecution come across as echoing the backlash from the past decade. Attorney John Fogelman in particular brings up heavy metal and Satanism while describing the teenagers. And for all intents and purposes, the statement feels like a blatant attempt at preying upon phobias in the jury, and as opposed to actually offering anything into evidence. Like, look at them, they listen to that metal music. Obviously, they're bad people, so they have no further need for motivation to commit these crimes. Sadly, Eccles and Baldwin were both found guilty on 3 counts of capital murder. With all of this, the spurious logic, the lack of any evidence, and while Baldwin received a life sentence, Eccles was given the death penalty. Certainly, there's a lot of people that would assume that had they not released the documentaries that would try to exonerate Damien later, that he'd probably be dead at this point.
Oh, yeah, most certainly, yeah.
So were they tried together? Because I know you said
yes. So they tried Jesse Miskelly on his own and then tried Eccles and Baldwin together.
So,
but it made sense for him to be tried separately because he had already confessed.
Yes. Right, no, I get that. But like between the two that were tried together, I wonder what was the rationale for life versus death for 1-to-1?
The argument is that Eccles is the sort of architect of ruin here, that he was the one that was the leader of everything. And of course, Damien is, as we talked about, admittedly sarcastic, pretty flippant about the whole process, and seems unrepentant to the people in the jury. So they go, okay, knock him down. Let's the other one just mostly stayed quiet, didn't get involved in too much, and Damien's the ringleader to them. So that's the distinction. I don't think it was any more involved or sophisticated than that, to be honest.
Probably just don't like his attitude.
I don't like the cut of your jib.
Actually, as they were talking about this in Paradise Lost, the main documentary, they refer to Eccles, who proclaimed himself the boogeyman of West Memphis. But he said that mostly it links to his immaturity and foreshadows that, he needed to grow up. He didn't realize how severe this was going to be, and he thought that the system was just, and you couldn't just bring somebody in and cast aspersions and then,
How naive.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I can see where he's coming from. It's not like he was in a situation where he would have seen it. I mean, he might have, actually, because he was moved to his aunt's for a time when he was kicked out of his parents, but he wasn't in the foster care system. He wasn't a foster child, so that might have been where he, thankfully, if he was in that, he might have been able to see the folly of it. So who knows? But yeah.
Yep. Pretty presumptuous, generally. Mm-hmm. But then later, in just a few short years, the teenager and convicted murderer would ultimately become a poster child for many alienated members of America's youth culture and develop a reverence normally reserved for rock stars and actors. I say this because the cases had attracted the attention of filmmakers Joe Berlinger and Bruce Sinofsky, and their resulting documentary Paradise Lost, The Child Murders at Robin Hood Hills, aired on HBO in 1996. It, of course, raised serious doubts about the guilt of Eccles, Baldwin, and Miss Kelly, and brought national awareness to the three men who had become known as the West Memphis Three.
Is this the documentary that you were referring to that has Metallica? Yes, this is the one
that has Metallica involved. Yes.
So given that we're 96 here, so we're like, load... are they using load material, or what sort of songs are we
You're
using?
Worried about what songs are on there? I think they Nothing Else Matters is one that I know that was definitely involved. I'm assuming Harvester of Sorrow, I think, was another one. I'm forgetting. But yeah, I didn't watch the damn documentary in preparation for this. I've heard lengthy discussion about it. I didn't run a track listing for you. I apologize for not being prepared. I'm not going into doc levels of detail on that particular. I won't tell you the motivations for the inclusion of particular songs.
If it kicks off with Ain't My Bitch.
With all of this that's happening, with the meltdowns, the malfunctions, and the bullshit, and you want me to talk about what Metallica songs they included?
I'm just presuming it's one. Okay, just the first minute of one on loop. That's it.
Give me fuel, give me fire, give me that which I desire.
Listen, I was just curious because we're if they're choosing to use Metallica songs, but we're also right in that cutting the hair time. I'm like, I wonder what kind of songs we're picking and choosing here. I'm
about to start cutting myself here. All right,
bleeding me.
You know what you can do, Doc? You can watch the documentary and then you can check back in with us next week.
Well played. Let's hope we don't freeze again. Fuck.
Or if viewers can leave comments down wherever
this
and
is
tell
not
us.
Making it into the show. Fucking kill everything. All right.
Smash that like button.
I'm about to smash your like button. The cases, of course, gained an even higher... I'm about to threaten you with something else. Fire in your house, I think. Fuel, fire. The cases gained an even higher profile with the airing of Paradise Lost 2, Electric Boogaloo, in 2000.
What?
As Paradise Lost 2 Revelations aired in 2000.
Bullshit.
And it did, yes.
And they called it Revelations.
Yes.
And only 4 years after the first one?
Yes. They were still incarcerated.
Well, of course. I just figured that it might be a little longer in time, kind of a 4-year follow-up.
There were 3 of them. So,
okay.
Also, you have Peter Jackson and Fran Walsh did their own documentary. There was another documentary series that happened in the midst of this. Also, celebrities like Johnny Depp and Eddie Vedder became vocal supporters. Right. Eddie Vedder actually sponsored shows to try to free the West Memphis Three. There was a lot of hoopla and hullabaloo surrounding the circumstances here. Thankfully, I'm glossing over a lot of this because I've garbled through script, thankfully, and 2. For much longer than I would have cared to have been at this point. But in any event, their cause was further aided by a series of noteworthy events. In the year 2004, Hutchison recanted her testimony. So
that long?
Yes, she waited that long. And she'd had the money, so I'm sure she'd exhausted it several times over. But she did claim that she lied at the urging of police who allegedly threatened to implicate her in the murders if she didn't cooperate.
Yeah, I'm reminded of that like Simpsons meme, right, with the reporter, like, why now? Why not 10 years ago?
Mm-hmm.
Like what in 2004 had her have a change of conscience?
It's a good question. It's like, yes, I understand that there was a fly in your soup, but did you have to finish the whole soup before you complained?
You even ate the fly. I don't get it.
Uh-huh.
She probably heard Saint Anger and thought, if Metallica can be wrong, maybe I can be wrong.
In any event, then in 2007, a hair found in the knot on one of the victims, which was noted as being linked to Lars Ulrich at the time, apparently. No. All right. A hair that was found in the knot on one of the victims that was utilized. So as they tied them with the shoelaces, they found a hair in one of the knots that was sent for DNA testing. This is 2007 from 1993.
But it's interesting that they still, like, because it would have been within state evidence. So unless this was under some sort of appeal, it's interesting that they still chose.
It's an appellate thing.
Oh, okay, I got you.
Because I thought this entire time they're saying that they were falsely convicted. None of them, like other than Miss Kelly, pled guilty. They were all saying, no, we didn't commit this crime. So they're fighting it actively. And of course, all of the hoopla, the documentaries, all the other things are kind of helping to bolster the appeals as they go forward. So, prompted by this, they send in the hair found on the thing for DNA testing, which this wasn't available in the 90s either, which is handy to note. So just as technology advances, they're moving into it. It was determined that the hair was not consistent with any of the three individuals, Eccles, Miss Kelly, or Baldwin. However, it was consistent with the hair of Terry Hobbs, the stepfather of Stevie Branch that we alluded to earlier.
Oh.
In addition, another hair found at the crime scene was consistent with the hair of a friend of Hobbs. However, Hobbs denied any involvement in the murders, and it's his stepfather. There's any number of chances that, you know, if you're helping the kid to tie his shoes or something, your hair could get involved. Like, there's a lot of innocent explanations. But that's again, fair. Folks are just grasping at straws. But ultimately what it proves is that, you know, you've got no evidence still tying any of these three to that murder. So based on this and any additional evidence, including allegations that during deliberations in the trial of Eccles and Baldwin, the jury foreman introduced Miss Kelly's confession, despite the fact that it was inadmissible. And so a judge finally vacated all three convictions on August 19th, 2011.
Oh,
wow.
18 years.
Yep.
Good
you know, what's
Lord.
fascinating about that, too, though, would be just from like a different point of view. That would be 3 years into, for instance, the Obama presidency. You'd have gone through many years of Clinton presidency. So at any time, like, there could have been a presidential pardon, couldn't there have, on this sort of thing?
There could have. I'm not sure, again, whether Clinton would have been willing, considering it's his home state that it was coming from. But yeah, that's, again, you can get granular in studying this. It's certainly, I'm mostly attempting to just kind of give you the broad strokes here.
Yeah.
Particularly because this is at the end of a significant amount of research done here. So,
and it could be its own. It could have been its own multi-parter, but
again,
it wasn't,
yes,
and it doesn't
to that
need
point,
to be.
The last pod episode, like I said, it's 3 or 4 episodes. If that's the amount of time they took, and even they go and gloss over some points here. They're not going blow by blow. So
it's 18 years of history that occurs. Right. Like, you're going to be compressing stuff.
Even more maddeningly, and this is another source of debate for the topic, immediately thereafter, Eccles, Baldwin, and Miss Kelly all pled guilty while maintaining their innocence. Their incidents, good God. I'm verklempt. I've got a case of the vapors. So they pled guilty while maintaining their innocence. This rare legal maneuver is known as an Alford plea.
Right.
And so they were released after each was sentenced to time served and received 10 years suspended sentence.
Is the name of the plea a lie?
No, it's Alford. Sounds like Alfred, I know, but yeah, it's an Alford plea.
Alford.
This is, of course, what was chronicled in Paradise Lost 3, Purgatory, which was released in 2011.
So by pleading guilty, they were unable probably to, like, sue, right? To get, like,
Well, also, it's a further, sort of bit of misjustice, because if you believe that these three are actually innocent, as they proclaim that they are, that also means that whoever actually perpetrated the crime is never going to be tried for it because the case is closed.
Right.
Because they were considered guilty of the crime
so it lets
by
away,
the law.
Yeah, so it lets whoever was truly guilty off.
Yes.
And prevents them from seeking like monetary compensation for like decades lost of their life.
Yeah, I do not know about that, but yeah,
well, that would be my guess, because it's hard to sue and say like, "Hey, you stole years of my life." If you're like, "Hey, you're guilty,"
yep, and at that point, guilty. You're also just happy enough to be out of prison. That it's like,
exactly.
Sure, yeah.
Well, and if that's your only option, if it's I can sign this and say that I'm guilty for something I didn't do, but I get to go home. Or I can say, screw this, I refuse to put my name to it, and then get to still live in prison. You're kind of screwed then, right? So, yeah.
So while there were other suspects that were later discussed on the internet and in media projects such as the documentary West of Memphis, which was the Peter Jackson, Fran Walsh documentary I was referring to earlier, law officials ultimately closed the case. In an interesting association to lighten the mood a bit as we're heading out of our little end tail of the trial here, for contemporary climate here, for pop culture, for those playing the home game, and I know that you are, in the 4th season of Netflix's Stranger Things, the character and story of Eddie Munson is closely based on Damien Eccles' life, as Eddie is also wrongly accused of murder based on his appearance and love of metal music, specifically Metallica. So there you are. Enjoy.
Interesting.
The writers admittedly or reportedly took inspiration from the Paradise Lost documentary in the creation of Eddie and the surrounding sort of community fervor that lynches the individual, basically. So,
isn't it fascinating? Like, just from like, because you got to wonder what these guys are up to nowadays, right? Because they obviously, like I said, probably couldn't sue for money. So then it's like, and then you've been in prison for decades, so you haven't been able to really develop much of the skill set. So it's like, is he working at the grocery store there or something? Like, just,
Damien wrote a book specifically that you can track down and check out, and that sort of discusses the whole circumstances in his situation. So I can speak to that at least. I don't know about the other two because, again, I had a lot of information being put into here, and at this point...
I was just thinking I was just throwing stuff out there, like, mentally, because I'm just like, how fascinating would it be to, like, go to the local Kroger's or whatever, and then the guy, like, bagging your groceries is, like, Damien, and you're like, hey, how's it going?
Also, like, interestingly enough, and I completely glossed over this in the course of talking about it, like, he's also named after the purported, son of the devil from the Omen films, like, that, as if that isn't enough to, incriminate on guilt by association as well. But in any event, we've gone a long time. We're going to wrap this fucker up. So, to crib from Austin Powers a bit, what does it all mean, Basil? The Satanic Panic, regardless of its varying inciting incidents, has a significant ripple effect spanning across cultures, continents, communities, and social circles. Its impact is unbound by time, location, or situation, and speaks to the ease at which a collective of concerned citizens can be converted into a teeming, bloodthirsty mob. When a trio of teenage boys can be convicted of murder most foul almost purely owing to public sentiment, circumstantial evidence, and little else, there's something far more disturbing and intellectually stunted at play. This is further emblematic of a slew of other issues alive in the American political system today, be it gun control, women's right to choose, book banning, trans rights, or whether or not a public figure can try to incite a coup with impunity. Ultimately, religious freedom versus freedom of thought in America is mutated into a cavalcade of extreme moral superiority, acting out of startling inferiority complex. And regardless of the end of the political spectrum that you're on, the extremes at either end are threatening to spin this country into a metaphysical tailspin, yet again, through frivolous and sanctimonious legislation, or allowing prejudices to dictate policies. For example, in the great state of Arkansas that we were just discussing, the state that brought us the West Memphis 3, they're currently proposing something tantamount to resegregation of schools under the watchful eye of crackpot kook Sarah Huckabee Sanders.
No.
So thank you, Sarah. Yes. They are claiming that they don't want to keep, punishing the privileged folks by forcing them to stay in a school system which is not meeting their needs. So they're trying to create a law that will allow people to go into the public school or the private school system more readily and sort of defund public schools. And essentially, yes, they're just making segregation occur again.
That's what they're doing in Arizona. That's what they were doing in Arizona before we elected our current governor. But okay. So yes, because getting them out of the public education system, pretty much, turning public ed into got it.
So the division, as we've seen through the entirety of the Satanic Panic, is still ongoing. It's just changed costume. And we need to look no further than this prior several episodes and our other discussions on the topic to prove that the opium of the masses can sometimes poison the population to death.
Ooh.
But I am still clinging to the hope that a panacea of education, respectful discourse, and a broad proliferation of empathy can help to elevate us to a place of understanding and acceptance in this country. Yet again, I'm not overly fond of the alternative after having seen it in action over the course of researching this show. And that, friends and listeners, is the entirety of my stance here on discussing the Satanic Panic. Thank you for your patience and for dealing with all the technological nonsense over the course of this particular show.
The way you wrapped that up, it was very like Andy Rooney-ish.
Thank you. Yes. Rather than Andy Dick, I'm happy.
I don't think we got a single lie.
No, it took a lot of stabs too. I thought we did. Did pretty well at trying.
You did. I mean, you were very actively engaged, and this is one of the things I love about how we wind up getting long shows versus how we don't wind up getting long shows, which is when we have discussion and we have fun and we go off and dovetail into nonsense like what Metallica songs we did a documentary.
I bet you in the last pod episodes they covered it, I bet you.
Fuck off. I will tell you, I love those things normally when my fucking computer is not trying to consume itself in front of me. So yes, I'm always happy for those things. Thank you for going there with me, and we'll look it up. I'll see what I can find. Maybe that's an After Dark discussion as well, once we look up Jack-O-Lantern or whatever the
Hack-O-Lantern. How dare you forget it, Shane?
I've had a lot of shit flowing through this brain over the course of these episodes here. I'm on 27 pages of research by the time lies were added, so. All right. Any final stabs other than, Hack-O-Lantern?
I got nothing. I mean, I stabbed away and missed everyone.
Ears.
Well, Doc, I hate to prove that I can fall back on old standards and no one will call me on the carpet, but there's a list lie up front here, and to prove your prior thesis from last episode, it's something that we got off on a tangent discussing, and so Stryper, by the way, is a Christian metal band. They're one of the few famed Christian metal acts. So while I was talking about all the other satanic metal acts involved, throwing Stryper in the middle of it, and we even discussed it. Yeah, Stryper, they love them some Jesus.
It's so funny because
I asked if they were a band. I didn't ask if they should have belonged with that list.
No, and
I'm upset with myself.
Well, I should have caught it because you shouldn't be upset because you weren't even sure if they were a band. Mm-hmm. I was aware they were a band. I even referenced an album cover of theirs.
Yep.
And so I should have realized, wait a second, one of these things is not like the other. I'm going to call bullshit. But instead I was just like, oh no, yeah, now that, cause your question made me hop into, oh no, Michael, it's a band and there's this album cover. And I got lost in that train of thought and was like, all right, let's move on.
Much like Michael did in episode 1, you bailed me out of the lie by defending the credulity of my lie. And so thank you. I appreciate it.
I mean, it's a good tactic. It works most of the time.
Yep. It's lie number 1. And then to further solidify that point, that when we get off on, digressions, it's proof that we're all talking about something I love. The word Diablo and a makeshift pentagram had nothing to do with the crime. That was a complete conjuration of my brain, had nothing to do with that.
Which means that when we hopped in with the video game talk, and then subsequently afterwards, Diablo was discussed in your script.
Yes.
We were all on board with the same line of thinking, and it was all bullshit.
He knew we were going to be talking about it because he knows us, which is also a really good strategy.
Yep.
Like I've done it before. You add a little bit more context. You assume that they're going to take it hook, line, and sinker, and you keep going with it. It's
but
perfect.
You know what's so funny?
It's so funny because if we had just shut up and let him say it, if he had brought up a video game, we might have hopped in with like, is that bullshit? Because we were taking stabs left, right, and center. But because we preemptively started talking about the video game, when he brought up the video game, it gave him the opportunity to say, "Oh, don't worry, I've got that in my script in just a second here," and it made it all seem natural. If we had just let him say it, we probably would have called it.
You're like a puppy that slipped the leash and then ran headlong into traffic.
Well done. Yep. Well done.
Yep. So, funnily enough, I feel, to me, it's all the more galling. The reason I put the lie in is because there was no evidence at all tying anything to Satanism until they pushed it onto Damien. So there was no association of this whatsoever other than the fact that the kids had been mutilated. And so they're like, oh, it must have been devils. It must have been devil worshippers. Like, there's nothing there. And so I was like, I'm going to at least give a kernel of something that makes a little more sense to associate it. There wasn't even that. That's how galling this is.
Now that we're kind of a little bit away from it and stuff, I was going to crack a little joke because we were talking about the Diablo hot sauce, Taco Bell hot sauce.
Yes.
And then we were talking about certain thing that had been bitten.
Yes.
And I was just going to reference.
That's when you needed to mute yourself so that you could compose for a minute.
That's why you were laughing. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I was like, there's a joke there about Diablo hot sauce and needing it to put on a certain kind of taco that somebody might have had.
Well,
or a sausage.
I was actually going to do a bit about there being like a stray Taco Bell bag also left at the scene of the crime. But, like... Again, that would have just driven home the point again that it was a very good lie that just passed right under the radar, which we were more than happy to take and run with.
Yeah.
So,
damn.
And I'll tell you, admittedly, when I started like conjuring the lie, I thought, hey, this is around the same time when the game came out, and I was like, oh, it makes it even more like it's saucier if it came out, if this is before the game came out. And of course it was by several years. So yeah, this whole thing was just me going like, it had nothing to do with anything, but I'm like, maybe just having something written like Diablo would be weird enough. So there you go. That's lie number 2. All right. Lie number 3. While all of the nonsense surrounding our super sleuth Jerry Driver for the most part is true, the one aspect of his whole conspiracy theory that we went over was the connective tissue with our prior episodes. So he did not glean many of his concepts about Satanism from reading The Ultimate Evil by Maury Terry. Had very little to do with his thinking. I'm sure he's never even heard of it, to be honest. He just, saw kids with tattoos and t-shirts and thought they must be the devils.
Man. So, and I was going to say, like, nah, it had to have been
saw
like
it in your
Michelle.
Eye too.
I was going to say, was it Michelle Remembers instead? I was going to call and I was like, well, I don't think that he would have known about that book. Because then you explained it and damn it.
So that's the lie. And then to follow up on that as well as part of his attempts to combat the process in particular, he started his night drives and his neighborhood watch. In truth, he was just driving around doing the neighborhood watch deer sighting for witches out in the woods on his own recognizance, and that was how he thought he could best battle Satanists, was by finding these witches' covens. So it has nothing to do with the process, has nothing to do with the book The Ultimate Evil, so those were the 2 lies that I threw in there. I was trying not to do things horrendously cheap this time. Other than Striper, which I admit that was a bit below the belt, but
that was still good. It was still a good lie.
Yeah, it worked out well considering we stopped to chat about that exact band.
And now to one that I was a little loosey-goosey on, but we still managed to make it around because I think I'd fatigued the both of you, and there's just so much information to assimilate as well. So Damien Eccles' bulk of familiarity with Aleister Crowley had nothing to do with the conjuration of Choronzon. He just liked Crowley. He read it, but it wasn't something where he studied it dedicatedly. I have spent a lot of time studying the conjuration of Choronzon and all of the other material there, so hence my throwing it in as being a thing that could have been used to pull Damien further into the midst of it being demonology is...
More like Damashane.
Thank you. But admittedly, demonology was something I was into, so there's a lot of connective tissue to my own interests here. So yeah, apparently Damien Eccles and I are Eskimo brothers in some way, shape, or form. I don't know what it is.
Hot.
So, of course, him being a Stephen King fan and being interested in transfiguration and showing Flag was transfigured as well was all stuff I used. So all that is one big lie. And then the second mention of it not being referred to at all in the trial, and that they purely focused on sex magic and the concept of child sacrifice, they didn't even do that. They only asked about the one throwaway line about child sacrifice, which they misunderstood and didn't realize that he was referring to ejaculation.
Oh my God.
That's it. Yep. And that, I believe, is all 6 of my lies, friends. The rest of that is as true as can be believed. Once you take out all the foibles and my double dipping in my script here of providing 2 different coverages of the trial. So
I'm kind of surprised we didn't land a single lie, just because I felt for a little bit there we were just kind of machine gun firing it out. Like, is that bullshit? Is that bullshit? Is that bullshit?
It also speaks to how crazy the whole circumstances surrounding the trial and how quickly and easily they convicted them are. Because, all of it sounds so ridiculously batshit to begin with that you don't have to lie much to make it sound, incredible. But the whole bit with just a random member of the community up and deciding he's going to start working as a juvenile officer and running around tracking people, like, his Jerry Driver's whole involvement is disgusting to me and really vexes me.
Is he dead now?
I don't
Probably
know.
not.
We can hope, I suppose.
Yeah, we can hope, but probably not. Knowing how this thing went. Yeah.
So, that's what I had for you, gents. And that was all of the weird sort of strands and tributaries of thought that I discovered from all of my recent viewing, reading, and listening history and contemplating the Satanic Panic as we went forward. And so there you go. I hope that Jessica's the only other person other than Michael that was as excited to see this happen. So I hope that you are both satisfied. Sir. Thank you. That's a significant amount of material to wade through. So I'm glad that we all survived.
Yeah, and it was very fascinating. Thank you for adding more context to the initial episodes.
Well, I do my darndest. I got so flustered in the course of all the stuff breaking down and everything. I didn't give you the subheading for this episode. I didn't give you this is otherwise called The Devil You Know.
Oh.
Yeah, terrible. It's just a great subheading.
Man.
I was very proud of that title and just
should have worked in something about tears and just gone with The Devil May Cry.
You're really just, working off that Diablo. I understand. You're some kind of monster, Doc. I'll tell you that much.
How dare you? Diablo's a great game. Does anybody remember the name of a very similar dungeon crawler game for like the original Nintendo, the NES, and it had like the archer and a barbarian?
Are you talking about Gauntlet?
Yeah, Gauntlet. That's it. I remember that. Oh
man, that arcade game, that was the shit. I loved that arcade game. Yeah, I wasted so much money on that game. Ooh.
By so much money.
My Nintendo was gifted to me by my grandfather, and it got infested with roaches. And it still worked.
Still ran, yeah.
It still worked, but when you would open the thing and to put the cartridge in, like some roaches would occasionally scuttle out.
Do you mean like like roaches?
I wish.
Okay.
No, I wish. Cockroaches.
I always got the munchies every time I opened that box. It was so bizarre.
I just remember playing a lot of Gauntlet, and I have like distinct memories of being in like second grade or something like that, and having to like open the thing and cockroaches scuttling out. But I really wanted to play the game, so I'm sitting there like as they're scuttling out, blowing into it to try to get all the rest of them out, so I can
get
shove
all the
cartridge
eggs out and everything.
Get all the smoke out and
and just trying to clear it out so I can get the cartridge in.
Was sitting there with a power glove on, just go like, "Come on, I'm the wizard. I gotta play Gauntlet."
Oh, hack into the mainframe! I'm in. It's all roaches, nothing but roaches.
I mean, that was like an extra game in and of itself. You know, it's the game that came with the console. It's like Whack-A-Mole, but with roaches.
How many roaches this time? Oh, 10. Ooh, new record.
I think I told this before, didn't I? The Cockroach Commando story. Not about the NES ones, but
Cockroach
so you decided
Commando?
to play like live-action duck hunt with the cockroaches and just shoot them as they ran out of the machine?
As I've said in the past, my mother and I, single mom, and we grew up poor. We had one of those, what do they call it, like a Murphy bed or something like that, the bed that folds out with the wall. Yeah. So we lived in a little studio apartment that had that, and we had the NES that was infested with cockroaches and stuff. But anyways, there used to be a quilt that we had that it was a patchwork quilt on one side, but on the back side it was just like a pink red, just solid pink red. And so she would tie that around my neck like a cape, right? So that the red part was on the back, and then she would give me a fly swatter, and I would go around killing the cockroaches, and I was the Cockroach Commando. And so I was like a superhero going around. And, obviously as an adult, the idea of like a little kid going around and like having to kill and clean up the cockroaches sounds pretty horrific. But as a kid, when you're living in the moment, you've got your little cape on and you're the Cockroach Commando and you have your little, fly swatter like superhero tool, and you're going around and killing them, and like, you make up little games for points and stuff, depending on how many you can get.
You adopt an Arnold Schwarzenegger accent and like, come on, I'm the Cockroach Commando. Kill you.
It's fun. So it's like I have fond memories of like playing Gauntlet, which then reminds me of when Diablo came on the PlayStation.
When cockroaches ruled the earth.
If not for the valiant efforts of the Cockroach Commando.
That's right. Well, I mean, Jerry sounds like a cockroach, so I wish we had a commando to take him out.
Indeed. It just makes me think of like the Jurassic Park theme song playing as you're descending with the fly swatter.
Yeah, we make the best of what we can, right? I have fond memories of that. Of course, it's a fond memory I don't want my own offspring to have to go through.
Spared no expense.
In superhero comics, they always have the child take over the mantle, take the mantle.
That's right.
So
and I might have that quilt somewhere. I have to like pull it out of a dusty old box from the attic, and when she's a little older, blow off the dust, and you are
plot
now
twist. It is made
Commando.
of cockroaches.
See, I was going to say, when you were talking about the fact that it's patterned on the top and then just sort of plain on the bottom, I was waiting for you to say that like when one day you picked it up and cockroaches were just teeming under the fabric, and that's how bad the infestation got. And I was about to cry for how tragic your youth was.
I was a very talented Cockroach Commando during my tenure. When I wore that cape, there weren't enough cockroaches to infest anything in that area.
Except for the Nintendo.
Well,
that was their home base.
That's because they caught me on my off days as I'm trying to play Gauntlet.
I see.
I'm not clocked in. I'm not doing this today.
That's right. Yeah.
You should have just taken off and nuked the thing from orbit. It's the only way to be sure.
Yeah.
All right, I've got my Aliens reference in for the evening. I feel good. I've only had 7 dropped Zoom sessions today, so I think I'm fine to run this thing to a close. So I think that is going to finally wrap this thing up like a cockroach carapace for this evening's exploits. So thank you all for being here with us on another stirring installment of this, the Disinformed podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please like, subscribe, rate, and review. We would love to hear from you. And if you want to check us out a little further, there's going to be a link in the show notes that'll take you to all of our irrelevant socials. Got new episodes of the podcast dropping every lovely Monday morning. And of course, crazy nonsense on the tubes of you flying your way each fantastic Friday, so you can check us out both places. And further exploits to come as we near episode 200 canonically. Now granted, there are no numbers on the shows anymore for you all to see, but I know it's happening, and that is sufficient. So we're going to celebrate in some way, shape, or form. We'll find a way. Maybe we'll call up another random person and listen to some dishes being cleaned in the background.
We can do that. Get some dishes, pots and pans.
Life will find a way. Mm-hmm. Josie and the Pussycats can play a set in the background there. It'll be a good old time. But
I don't know. I'm scared.
I think that's going to finally put a nail in the coffin, at least for the Satanic Panic in this particular installment. So thank you all for going on a journey with us. And, once more again, Doc, can we get a Hail Satan?
Hail Satan!
Thank you. And magustalations to all of you who appreciate the volume of time I've spent discussing Last Pod episodes on the course of this podcast. But hopefully we kept it interesting. And at the very least, we'll keep you coming back for more. But that's going to be the end of this show. So for the Disinformed podcast this week, as Michael runs along, I'm Shane.
I am the Cockroach Commando.
And I'm Michael.
Fantastic.
And zippity zoop, we're out of here.
Not the cockroaches.